Welcome to Kindly Neurodivergent with Kay. Before we begin, I respectfully request that if you witness any pauses during this show, please continue watching. I'm composing a spontaneous comment or question, someone's processing their thoughts, in addition to repeating something that was unintelligible or misunderstood. It is natural discourse, and we can choose not to say anything while this is occurring. The experiences we discuss on this show are for educational purposes only. Please don't substitute them for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Today, I have Rachel Madel with me. She will be discussing how to approach augmentative and alternative communication with the lens of neurodiversity-affirming practices. Welcome, Rachel.
Thank you so much, Kayla. I'm really excited to be here.
Please introduce yourself.
So, my name is Rachel Madel. I am a speech language pathologist. I am really passionate about technology and how to use technology to support communication in lots of different ways. I have a private practice in Los Angeles where I work directly with mostly kids, but some adults in trying to support communication through augmentative alternative communication. And it's an area that I'm so passionate about that I have created an online business where I have a podcast called Talking with Tech, which Kayla was on most recently. I also sell digital resources. I do a lot of training in the world of AAC and I do a lot of speaking events, just trying to help support mostly clinicians, but also parents, educators, all on how do we use AAC with students? How do we support AAC? How do we select AAC? All things AAC.
Such valuable information.
Yes. And I also think it's an area where many people feel daunted and overwhelmed. And it feels really, really great to be able to share information in easy to digest little bite sized chunks of information and to kind of simplify something that can feel quite overwhelming to a lot of people.
What falls under AAC?
What falls under AAC? So it is definitely an umbrella term. Anything that could augment communication. So for individuals that maybe have some verbal speech or some other modalities of communication, we can use AAC to augment communication. There's also the alternative in AAC, which for those who either have very unreliable verbal speech or are non-speaking, an alternative form that could look as simple as a letter board or a choice board and can be as sophisticated as a high-tech speech generating device on either an iPad or a dedicated device. It's a broad range of things that are included under the term AAC. Most people think of the high-tech devices, but it also encompasses so much more than that.
Is it only for expressive communication?
I mean, clinically speaking, because I'm a speech language pathologist, I would say no, because I find it's so valuable to utilize as a teaching tool for students who might not have the understanding, the receptive language. I find that using AAC and modeling language with a visual support, because oftentimes alongside of AAC, there's some type of symbol or visual representation of the language that can be a really big game changer for students who are learning language. And so I would say that while we do think about it as expressive mostly, I would say that there's a huge element of receptive understanding and comprehension that goes along with using AAC as a tool for teaching language.
Interesting, as I always thought it was for expressive only.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think that's most people because we have the voice output that comes out of a high tech speech generating device. But again, like if I'm working with a student and they might have some verbal speech, but maybe they're confusing open and close or, in and out or some type of, linguistic concept. The visual component of the symbol can actually help teach the concept. Same thing with literacy. I feel like seeing those letters, hearing the letters, like this kind of multimodal learning opportunity that can happen with AAC can again just support learning.
Should it be renamed?
Should it be renamed? Yeah, it's funny. Chris Bouguet, he's my co-host on Talking with Tech. He always says like it shouldn't be called AAC, it should be called AAL, like augmentative alternative language, right? Because you could I think language is a better description because really like individuals that we work with are already using some form of communication, whether that be gestural communication, vocalizations. I mean, there's lots of different ways and modalities that individuals use for communication. But yes, exactly. You've talked about this on our podcast. But one of the benefits of AAC is really supporting the language. Using language is a way that can, be a more precise way for an individual to communicate. And so it's like really the language piece that we really want to focus on. And so I stole that from Chris, AAL.
I'm having him on next week.
Oh, amazing. So great. Yes, he's my work husband.
Mm.
What does it mean to approach AAC through a neurodiversity-affirming lens, and why does that shift matter?
I love it. I love this question. I think when I'm thinking through neurodiversity affirming practices in general, it's like it's really shifting the focus away from this deficits based model, like the things that we need to fix. And it's really shifting more into how do we support access, autonomy, agency for individuals who use AAC. And so for me, as a clinician, I'm really thinking about how do I give access to this individual? How do I help support communication that's already happening and building off of the strengths that I'm seeing instead of, maybe a more traditional model where I have a very specific agenda in my mind about what I think a student should be communicating in any given moment. It's really, it's really led by the individual in front of me. And I think that's the way I like to think about the neurodiversity affirming lens in which I practice through.
Just like how I don't only use one form of communication.
Exactly. And it's really like, there's a notion that verbal speech is the best way to communicate. And I think that comes out very early on with a parent who maybe just had a child that's diagnosed, or they're just getting started with AAC and they might have some fears like, what if this prevents verbal speech? And there's this kind of, we put verbal speech on a pedestal, right? Like this is the way that we communicate. And while that can be true, like a lot of individuals are using verbal speech, we also in this day and age are using lots of other modalities of communication.
Why is it so?
Why is it put on a pedestal? Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think it's just because that it's the way in which most people use to communicate and think about communication. Like when we say communication to someone who's not in my field, right? Just any person out there, it's like, well, they think about talking, right? Any parent who's new to speech therapy, when you think about what does a speech therapist do, you think they teach kids how to talk, right? So even like when I'm at a cocktail party, I need to like explain what I do to someone. I'm like, yeah, well, they're like, oh, like you help kids say their S's and their R sounds. I'm like, that's not exactly what I do. Yes, that's within my scope of practice. But I think just like it's very common to think about communication through verbal speech. And so I think that's probably why we see so much emphasis on it and we aren't really focusing on all of the other multimodal ways that people are communicating.
How is it different from using social media or texting or emails?
I mean, it's not. And so, like, that's a one way to normalize it for maybe a parent who is nervous to get started. And even just like when I'm thinking about how do I support the student that's in front of me when I'm working with them and their family, it's like, well, what are all the ways that everybody's communicating? We're sending a GIF instead of like full text, and we're sending emails, and it's like we're not hopping on the phone and calling people as much anymore. And so I think it's just, I think it does normalize multimodal communication and all the different ways that people can communicate. I think
Emojis.
emojis, exactly. And like, how fun are emojis? Like, you can say so much with one symbol. Exactly.
How does a neurodiversity affirming mindset change the way we view communication success?
I think that I think that the goal needs to be shifted from accuracy, like, oh, like I'm teaching the student how to say this word or this phrase in this context, which at some level, like we have to kind of anticipate and model what an individual might want to say in a specific context. But like, how do we actually shift that mindset to really viewing success as supporting connection? Because an individual in front of me could want to talk about their favorite show and say the same thing over and over and over again, right? And if I'm thinking through kind of a compliance based lens, I'm thinking like, no, like I don't want them to be saying Bluey all day long. Like I want them to be communicating all these other things. Or oftentimes parents are like, I want them to say please, right? I want to add please to the end of the things that they're communicating. And so I think if we're really thinking through neurodiversity affirming lens, we're really thinking, how do we help support this individual student connect with the people around them in a very authentic way? It's not like it's not what I think the child should say. It's me supporting what I think the child wants to say in any given situation. And I think that means like in a lot of ways we have to kind of tilt everything we know about like education, even speech therapy on its head and think about like, is it my idea? Like, am I really driving this? Or am I looking at this individual in front of me and really, through a curious lens, trying to support what they want to say, what's in their head? I'll share a really quick story. I was working with one of my coaching clients. So I do a lot of coaching with parents in my practice. And mom comes in. We use a video modeling approach. So mom sends a video and we look at the video together. The child's not even there. And we're kind of slowing down the process of the interaction and talking about it. I'm teaching skills and strategies. We're practicing these things together. And this mom shares a video of her going into her teenage son's bedroom. And she's like, good morning. And she's like modeling all of this like really beautiful morning language. And I'm like seeing her son. And I'm looking at her son and he looks like so over it. He's like, he doesn't care that mom's saying good morning. And so I pause the video and I'm like, if he could say anything to you right now, what do you think he would say? And mom has this long pause and she's like looking at the video and she's thinking, and she's like, I feel like he'd tell me to get out. And I'm like, yes, like he does not want you in there. He wants to keep sleeping. He's a teenage boy. And so, I'm like, what would it look like to model that for him? And so, the next week she comes back and she's like, I modeled get out one time, one morning. And every single day, the rest of the week, he could hear her walking down the hall to go into his bedroom, and he would get his device and he was saying, get out, before she even got in the room. And so I share that because I feel like that's a perfect example. Mom's idea was, I want to have this beautiful exchange with my son, my teenage son in the morning where he says like, "Good morning, mom. I love you." And like that wasn't matching his actual intention and his actual intrinsic motivation for communication in that moment. It wasn't matching what his idea was in his head. And I think that's the shift that we need to make, is really supporting what an individual wants to say.
How do you balance both sides of that example?
How do I balance both sides? Well, I mean, in a lot of ways, I guess I don't. Because I think we have to course correct, right? Like we're so used to putting words into kids' mouths and expecting them to kind of regurgitate them, whether they have verbal speech or not. We're like, tell grandma what you did this weekend, right? It's like a very common practice that adults do with kids. And I think it's incredibly important for kids with complex communication needs to really match whatever is going on, we think is going on in their brain. Because if we don't do that, then we risk modeling language that either never gets picked up by the student and used because it doesn't match their intrinsic motivation for communication, or it just we teach kids that like their ideas don't matter and that they should just say this thing that we think is important.
I mean the go away request versus needing to get started with the day.
Gotcha. I mean, I think that we can teach especially kids the language that they could use that matches what they're thinking and how they're feeling, but it doesn't mean that we have to necessarily we have to honor what they say and validate what they say, but it doesn't mean that they get to do whatever they want. Like a kid that just says cookies all day long and wants to eat cookies, it's like important for me to be able to hear that a child wants cookies or wants me to go away so that I can say, I know that you want me to get out of your room, but it's time to wake up. You have to go to school. Right. So I
How
think
do
that,
you determine the difference?
how do I determine the difference? Tell me more. Like, what do you mean? The difference between what?
Letting them have.
I mean, I think that's more of like a parenting choice, right? Like so myself as a therapist, I'm trying to just guide the parent or the communication partner in
Mm.
the actual language modeling. It's not my decision whether or not the child can eat cookies in that moment or can stay in bed for 15 more minutes, right? So it's like, I think my job as a clinician is to shine a light on what the individual or the child really wants to communicate and to honor that and to teach that. And then what they decide to do after that, is kind of their choice depending on the situation.
Isn't it ignoring expression?
No, because I think what's ignoring expression is mom just modeling good morning, but that's not actually what her son wanted to say, right? And so if we model get out, which is what we did, and then he now actually can say and has learned to say what he really was thinking, right? Which is our job as adults to model the language that individuals could say in any given moment to match their intrinsic desires, right?
Hmm.
And so when we give that option, all of a sudden, like, we open up a whole world, and we teach an individual, like, I'm here for you, like, I'm here to support what you want to say, because really what mom wanted him to say good morning, but that's not what he wanted to say. And so I think, again, it's a perfect example of, you know, one of the best coaching questions that I ask communication partners is, if your child could say all the words, what would they say in this moment?
Hmm.
And it's such a powerful lens to think about, because we're not actually thinking through that lens, unfortunately, when we're modeling oftentimes. And so it really puts a communication partner in the shoes, quote unquote, of a child. And it really helps them figure out the language that can match that individual's actual intention. And I think so often we're just like, well, of course it's morning time and we're going to model good morning, right? And it's like, yeah, except like that's not going to work if it's not actually what he wants to say, right?
What was neurodivergence affirming formerly known as?
What was neurodivergent? Say that again?
What was neurodivergence affirming formerly known as?
I don't know. I don't know. I just know of, like, neurodiversity affirming practices. I know that concept was, I believe, first coined by the author of Neurotribes, and the author's name I'm blanking on right now. I know Barry Prezant has been a big advocate of neurodiversity affirming practices. And luckily, in the last 5 years, I feel like it's been very much growing in kind of popularity, we'll say. We've seen a lot more people thinking through this lens, like child led therapy, all these things that are really great steps in the right direction. So I don't fully know the answer to that question, but I do know that I believe it was the book Neurotribes that first, but don't quote me on that.
How
Fact
can
checking.
AAC support autonomy and self-expression rather than focusing on compliance or correct communication?
I think that it kind of goes into what we just talked about a little bit, but the one thing I'll share is that, you know, I think that we can do this if we focus less on requesting and more on other types of communication, right? So I think that, like, if we're focusing on like correct communication, like, we have an idea in our head about what an individual should say in a given situation, and that's compliance driven, right? If we're really trying to support self-expression, we're again really matching what the individual is thinking the best we can. Obviously, we can't hop into a child's brain and figure out exactly what they're thinking, but we can look at context, body language, what we know about a child, and have a good guess as to like what they would say if they had all the language, right? And so I think that's the shift. The one other thing I'll say is, one of the big kind of practices that I teach is not giving corrective feedback with AAC. So like, that would look like holding up a picture of, an airplane, and a child saying train or car, right? Technically, we could look at that as like, oh, they were like incorrect in that. But, you know, really the skill of attributing meaning whatever the individual decides to say in that moment, we build off of that, kind of like improv, yes, and how do we build off of what that individual is saying? And then, like, that's the way that we kind of approach anything that's said, versus we hold up a picture of an airplane, child says train, and we're like, no, try again, right? Like, that's corrective feedback. And unfortunately, what we're doing is we're taking a population of students that are already not communicating a lot. And now we're teaching them there's a right answer and a wrong answer. And sometimes you might be wrong and you might have to try again. And that actually shuts down communication again with a population that we're really trying to expand communication. And so I would say that that is one of the biggest shifts is like, there's no such thing as a mistake on an AAC system, especially in when a child is learning language and exploring and babbling, we have to build off of what they're communicating with us.
But what if you are working on receptive communication with airplane?
I think there's a way to do it to teach the concept without giving corrective feedback. So if I was trying to teach the word airplane and a child says train, I'd be like, oh, you're thinking about trains right now. Do I have a picture of a train in here? Let me see if I have a train. This is an airplane, right? But let me see if I have a train. Or like, I know you love Thomas. Thomas is a train, right? Like there's ways to, again, build off of the communication that a child's showing you. And also not misconstrue that this actually is an airplane. But doing it in a way that's not giving that there's a right and a wrong
Good
answer here.
point.
Yeah, it's just a shift in the way that we're engaging with students.
What are some ways families and professionals can make AAC more meaningful and individualized?
Um, I mean, I think that it starts with really having a lot of conversations with a family and with a student. I think that looping in AAC users themselves into the conversation, it's not just about having, you know, these specific words and phrases that I always program into everybody's device. It's about having conversations with families about what's important to your family. What word do you use in that situation? For the AAC user, like, hey, like, what picture do you want? We're adding, unicorn or whatever the word is, right? Pick a picture. Like, which one do you like best? Like, what color should it be? Right? Like, we're including everybody into the process. And I think that just allows us to support that individual in adopting this technology as their own. And we give all of the very, really important language that that family uses and needs in that device so that we can have an AAC user access all of the things that are meaningful to that family, whether that's cultural, hobbies, pet names, favorite shows, like whatever the thing is, like we should make sure that we have all of those things programmed in. And it just takes a little bit of extra time as a clinician. You need to have that conversation. You need to check back in and follow up as you continue to kind of keep programming and keep customizing. I don't think it's just happening when you set up a device. I think it needs to be an ongoing process. And it just, you need to kind of build that connection with the family and with the student themselves, and include them in the process.
What kinds of barriers still exist in AAC access or attitudes, and how can we start breaking them down?
So I feel like, luckily, I think from a funding aspect, like there's never been a better, easier time to access AAC from the lens of using iPads. Now, not every individual can use an iPad for communication, depending on what access modality they're using. But I do think that the iPad has been a game changer for accessibility, which is great because it used to not be so accessible. As far as attitudes, yeah, let's talk about attitudes for a second because there are barriers when it comes to attitudes. The biggest one I'd say is limiting beliefs around what individuals with disabilities can do. And so, if we're thinking about how to really support this population, like the biggest thing you can do, in my opinion, to be a really amazing educator, clinician, parent, ally to an AAC user is to believe that this individual has lots of things to say, has more to say expressively than they can currently in this moment, understands way more than they can express, and the only thing stopping them is access to the technology and the modeling and language learning that needs to happen with AAC in order to be successful. And so we kind of have to check our limiting beliefs at the door and believe that no matter what the individual's disability is, no matter what their motor challenges are, all the things, like every individual has the human right to be able to access communication, and it's our job to figure out how to make that possible. And sometimes it's not easy, and we have to keep kind of turning over every stone and trying different access methods and all the things. But if we have a limiting belief that it's not possible, we'll be right every time. And so it's our job to believe that it's possible for every kid.
Why would iPad no not work?
Why say that again? Why would an iPad not work?
No.
Yeah. So for some individuals, like let's say it's mostly for alternative access. So like switch scanning or eye tracking, even though you can technically set up alternative access modalities on an iPad, it's just the technology just is not there in the way that it would need to be. And so for kids, especially that are needing alternative access, I would say the iPad is not the best route typically. Not in all cases, but typically you'd want to go down the path of getting a dedicated device.
So some people still use bulky devices.
Yes, they do. Although I will say they're less bulky than they used to be. Like I feel like they keep making them a lot more streamlined and smaller. But yes, some individuals are still using.
Really?
Really. Mm-hmm. Again, they're making the technology better and better. That's the cool thing about tech is like it's always evolving, it's always changing, it's always getting better.
I wish Proloquo to go was also on my Mac.
I know. I know. I think no, you can do some programming things on a PC. I also have a Mac, and so I'm just like they don't give you a lot of options with with Mac users. So frustrating.
Why?
I don't know. We should send an email. Send an email to Assistiveware.
Thank you for being on my show.
You're so welcome, Kayla. Thank you so much for thinking of me, and it was a really great conversation. I had a lot of fun.
Please share this episode with everyone you know.
I sure will.
If you want to be on, please reach out to me.